Welcome to Career Tools. This is Wendy.
And this is Amanda.
Today's cast, How to Persuade Someone with a Combination MTDISC Profile.
The questions this cast answers are, what is a mixed disc profile? How do I communicate with a mixed disc profile? And how do I construct an email with a mixed disc profile?
If you want the answers to these questions and more, keep listening.
Why do organizations love the effective communicator training? Well, for one, you get to learn how you naturally communicate when you're not even thinking about it. But then, we also teach you our behavioral model for identifying the traits of others and how they behave when they're not thinking about it. And the best part then is we practice tailoring communication based on likely scenarios you might encounter at work so that you can practice observing, analyzing, and then tailoring your communication so you can meet in the middle with your colleagues so you can have better relationships and better results. And a lot of our client organizations feel like this training is a great team building event because it is fun. For more details, contact Maggie by emailing her at customerservice@manager-tools.com.
So as well as the single letter common empty disc or disc profiles, D, I, S, and C, some people have a mixed profile or a combination profile, meaning that their natural behaviors align with more than one of the categories. Most commonly, you get DI or IS or SC or DC. If you've ever seen the letters on the logo, those are aligned. So the D and I are next to each other, the I and S are next to each other. So mostly you get the profiles that are combinations. You get two letters which are next to each other, but sometimes you do get a DS or an IC. And so one of the most frequent questions we get are, how do I communicate with someone who has both an I and an S? Like, do I treat them like an I or do I treat them like an S? And the answer is kind of, it depends, but actually it's not that hard to figure out. So in this cast, we're going to talk about how to figure it out.
All right. What we're going to cover today is first, identify their active profile, then pitch to the active profile, and lastly, don't forget the less active profile.
So easy, it only has 3 points. So the first thing to do is identify the active profile. We've said before, the best way to communicate with anyone is in the way they want to be communicated with. Instead of using whatever your preference is, you use whatever their preference is. So if somebody emails you, reply by email, because they clearly prefer to communicate by email. So the bigger picture of this is you observe their natural behaviors, work out what their disc profile is, and then adapt your behaviors accordingly.
And in general, people don't blend their profiles and end up somewhere in the middle when they have two of the high facets, the combination profiles, nor do they flip-flop between the two. Someone who is both high I and high S will always be focused on people. Their high I and high S behaviors have that people focus in common. However, because they have both an assertive side from their high I and the reserved side from their high S, you could see either assertive or reserved behaviors or both.
And what you almost certainly see is a consistent response to specific circumstances, which is really good because it makes deciding which preferences to cater to really easy. So in a specific circumstance, someone will use their I or use their S. And if that circumstance appears again, they will almost certainly use the same profile again.
For example, in a team meeting, a high I, high S individual may pull on their high I traits, leading assertively, focusing on the outcome and inspiring action. However, as a meeting attendee, they might rely more on their high S traits, listening attentively and offering more supportive feedback.
And if you have a high DC manager, for example, they might rely on their high C traits to review a project plan, analyzing the details line by line. And then once the project starts, you could see their high D traits making quick, decisive calls based on the certainty they have about the plan. So until in the planning phase, they could seem to be all high C. And then when you get going with the project and a quick decision needs to be made, they often turn into their high D selves.
The key to using MTDISC effectively in communication is tailoring both what you say and how you say it to align with the behaviors of the person that you're engaging with. This is why analyzing their profile is necessary. It helps you adapt your communication to their style. The first step is to identify not only their profile, but also their specific behaviors that they exhibit in the context where you're trying to persuade them. This principle applies whether the person has a single preference, for example, a pure high I, or a combination profile.
And if you wanted to be really effective, you'd want to observe their behavior in different situations. So you've got like a situation where they're being an I and a situation where they're being an S, and you start to work out when they pull on which set of traits. But even if you only see them in one specific context, analyzing their traits will still make you more effective, because most people go by guesswork or intuition, and a little bit of science or a little bit of analysis will get you further than none at all.
You don't need a lot of information in order to decide which profile someone is in using any particular circumstance. For example, suppose you're pitching services to a client with a high I, high S profile. In your initial conversation, think about what they're focused on. So first, are they concentrating on building a relationship with you, or are they more concerned about how the services will be delivered to their team? Then consider, are they enthusiastic about the possibilities, or are they focused on the implementation might affect their users? Are they making decisions quickly, even simple decisions like when and where you can meet, or are they doing it more slowly? So in all those examples, it was more high I behaviors compared to the more high S reserved behaviors.
So relationship focused, enthusiastic, quick to decide, those are all high I traits. And more deliberate, more concerned about the impact on the team or the users, those are more high S behaviors. So you can tell whether or not somebody is using, which one they're using in that circumstance.
And on the other hand, if it's the same person as your boss and you're persuading them to change a workflow that could affect team dynamics, you might observe more high S traits. As a high S manager, they're going to prioritize the team's emotions and stabilities over the outcome. So recognizing which profile is dominant at the time allows you to adapt your approach, tailoring your communication to suit the situation effectively.
And if you see them outside of those situations, then you'll know not to be confused. I know some DIs who are all D at work. They're focused, they want to get things done. They just check off the list of things to do. But they become more high I when they're outside of work. So if you go to dinner with them in the evening, they're all I. There's no D at all. And you think, wow, this person's completely different. They're not completely different. They have two sets of traits and they use different ones in different circumstances. What we don't see often is people having a full work personality and a home personality. Usually, if you're working in the yard, for example, you've got some project in the yard, you're usually your work personality when that project, because it's a project and you're doing the project. So don't expect that your family will see you as a completely different personality to the people that at work do, because that's rarely true.
Yeah, it just depends on all the circumstances.
We're offering both our EMC and ECC virtually in February if you can't make one of our in-person events. You can sign up online for the same training delivered via Zoom. So February 10th, we're hosting a virtual ECC at 1 p.m. Eastern, and February 11th, Mark is kicking off an EMC virtually with sessions that start at 10 a.m. Eastern. Come see us by signing up at manager-tools.com/training.
So now let's talk about how to pitch to the active profile. Once you've established which behaviors the person is using predominantly, tailor your pitch to A, communicate that behavior's preferred style, and B, address the concerns of that profile.
So for someone whose high D is prominent, you want to use quick, loud, and an assertive tone when you're speaking, and maintain strong eye contact, which is all things that high Ds will do to you. You want to keep the presentation short and high level and focused on the key points, because high Ds like to get to the point and they don't like wasting time. Get straight to the point without any unnecessary preamble or small talk. The high D doesn't want to know about your weekend. The high I absolutely does. But even if it's a DI, if they're in work mode and they're thinking, I'm being presented to, I have to make a decision, they'll be in almost certainly in D mode, and they'll be like, no, I don't want to talk. Maybe I'll talk at the end once the decision is made, and then I'll be more kind of personable, but not until the decision is made.
So in other words, just communicate more like a high D.
Yeah. So you want to use facts and figures, not stories or anecdotes. A high I loves to hear a story. A high D wants to know, what are the facts? What's the numbers? It's a concrete decision for them. They want to see the results or the examples of previous achievements. So if you're pitching them an idea, they want to know, when did you try this before and did it work? Exclude anything that doesn't contribute to their decision making. So even if there's a point that you think is relevant, that they don't seem to think is relevant, like they haven't asked you about it, or they don't seem to have any concern about something, then you can move straight over it. So a high S might think that the impact on the team is a really important decision-making factor. A high D doesn't think so. So you can just leave that out of your presentation. And even though that would feel to the high S like you were missing out something really important, the high D just doesn't think that way. And so it's not a factor in the decision-making. If you want them to take action, you have to be explicit about that action you want them to take. Please, will you do X and Y by Thursday? And then emphasize how your proposal will help them achieve their goals and drive success, because those are the things that high Ds are focused on. They want to achieve goals. Like, they see the hill, they want to take the hill, they want to get to the top of the mountain, and then they see the next mountain and they go for that mountain. So if you can show them how you will help them achieve their goals, then they're more likely to say yes to whatever it is you're proposing.
For someone who is high I predominant, first speak quickly and loudly using gestures to emphasize your points. They tend to use bigger gestures. They will use the eye contact, and they tend to talk a little bit louder. So you can also use that. Make sure you use relatable examples in stories that involve people, because high Is are people focused. Making it more relatable to the people that are involved, or the stories to give more background information, can be very helpful. Present information in a short, high-level format to maintain their attention. Really keeping things at the higher level, less details, will help persuade high Is. They want to know the big picture, what the outcome is going to be. They're not too worried about how you're going to get there, because they definitely trust their people that are involved in the work situations. You can start with a friendly conversation to establish a personal connection. High Is love small chat or small talk, chit chat. That's how they're really big on making that relationship, getting to know you, because the more they know you, the more they trust, and you can leverage that. Include opportunities for them to talk, share their ideas, and ask questions. Allowing for more of a conversation can help get high Is on board. Highlight testimonials, endorsements, or examples of others who have succeeded. Again, if you can give the example of other people involved and how they felt about it and how it was successful, that can help persuade them in the situation. Show how your proposal can enhance their image or positively influence their network. We know that high Is know a guy or have a guy for everything. So if you can influence their network or show how these actions are going to have a positive impact on them expanding their network, that is very helpful when persuading high Is. But make sure you keep that. If you want them to take action, you want to make sure it's simple and straightforward. High Is sometimes get lost in the big picture, so keeping things more simplified and straight to the point can keep them on target and maintain their attention. And also emphasize how your plan will help them achieve their goals and shine.
High Is, again, like to win in a different way to the high Ds.
Yeah.
The high D just wants to achieve the goal for themselves. A high I likes to win and everyone to know that they won. So for someone whose high S is predominant, you want to ask first about their concerns and listen attentively. Show them that you're listening. Their focus is on resolving problems rather than moving forward. And so you want to make sure that you've heard their concerns and that you're going to address them. Include pauses to give them space to process information and ask questions. So a high D will be driven nuts by pauses, whereas a high S will think, okay, I've got time to just think this through slowly. I need to think of it through step by step. So you want to make sure there's some space in your presentation for them to do that. Speak slowly, softly, and with a steady tone. That's the reserved nature of a high S. They tend not to be loud. They're much quieter and they're careful about their words in a way a D and an I isn't, and that means they speak more slowly. Provide explanations of how your proposal will affect the people they care about. So that could be their team, it could be their customers, it could be users, but somewhere along the way, there's always a group of people that the high S cares about. And more than the effect on themselves, they're worried about the effect on those people. Avoid overloading slides with too much information. You don't want to give it to them all at once. You want to kind of pass it out so that, again, they've got space in between to think it through and to consolidate what you've told them. You want to present a logical step-by-step progression that leads to your conclusion. A high D is fine with you going straight to the conclusion, and as long as they understand how you got there, they often don't want to see how you got there. A higher I, you want to gloss over the details because they're not detail-focused, but a high S wants to know what was the path, and did you consider those people that they care about on every step? So share stories and examples of successful implementations that align with their values. So if you can show an example of when you did this thing previously and it made this group of people happier or more effective, or just it made their lives better, then you'll win with a high S. If you want them to take action, make it clear and specific and manageable. If it's too big, it's better if you give them a broken down objective and several steps than a big one. And show how you'll help them achieve success and provide ongoing stability. Because remember, high S's don't like change. So if you are proposing something that will cause a change, which almost certainly you are, you want to show how that in the future it will stay stable.
Now, if someone is predominantly high C, you need to be ready for detailed questions with comprehensive data. Unlike the other profiles, high Cs very much value all the details involved in all the processes. So coming ready to be able to answer all of their questions, because that's what they're going to ask about, is the data involved and the details. And you're going to want to have that ready for them to show that you're prepared. You want to provide clear, accurate, and fact-based information. High Cs don't like the fluff involved in a lot of persuasion, similar to, I would say high Ds, but high Is and high S's like more of that relationship. High Cs just want as much information that you can give about it, and it has to be fact-based. So you're going to want to avoid vague statements. Again, because they are detail-driven, saying things like overall or without precision, you lose high Cs very quickly, right? 80% of the way is not okay to a high C. So I've learned that one the hard way a few times. Or you can say it if you really want to start a conversation. You're going to want to present your ideas in a very organized and step-by-step manner. High Cs are very good at creating and following processes. So if you want to approach them, you're also going to want to have the information ready in a very similar fashion. You want to avoid giving emotional appeals, because it's not about the emotions involved. It's about the work, the process involved. So make sure you focus on the objective reasoning and the tangible outcomes, exactly what's going to happen through this process. Make sure you include supporting documentation, data, or references to back up your claims. High Cs are very good about seeing all the different angles in a situation, because that is all data that they need in order to make sure that the decision they make is 100% accurate. So you being able to see all the different scenarios and all the different sides and being able to support what you want with that information is the best way to approach them. Give them time to assess the details before making the decision. If you're going to approach or persuade high Cs, they are not the profile that are making the quick decisions. In fact, if you can give them the information ahead of time before you meet them, you will be better off because they need time to process, dig in, make sure that they will have questions that you can answer before you sit down and talk. Unlike high Ds that you can say, hey, what are we doing? And they will say, we are doing this. And everyone moves on very quickly. High Cs really need that time to process along with high Ss. So keep that in mind. You also want to demonstrate how the risks are mitigated and how the plan adheres to high standards. Because again, 80% of the way is not okay. They prefer things as accurate. They have very high standards. They want to make sure all the details are correct. So make sure that you can assuage all of those doubts that they might have or concerns by showing up with the data, the facts of how you got to this decision. And make sure this is all very clearly outlined with what you want them to do. So ensure that each step is precise and achievable of what they're going to be responsible for.
So it's pretty easy. For each one, you just communicate like you were one of those. So if it's a high D, you communicate like a high D. If it's a high I, you communicate like a high I. Because we all want to be communicated with the way that we communicate. But don't forget that less active profile. So even though someone predominantly uses one profile per situation, the concerns which are important to the other profile, the other part of them, are not completely absent. For example, a high I will be excited about a new project and ready to move quickly and not care about the details. And a high I, high S, who exhibits high I behaviors during your presentation will be in the same way. They'll be excited, they'll be ready to move on, they'll be enthusiastic, but that high S trait, that concern for the effect on people and not rocking the boat, keeping stability, those concerns are still there. So you still have to address those, even though your predominant presenting profile is I.
The solution is to address these concerns while communicating in the style of their active profile. For example, when the high I profile is dominant, you might highlight how the solution benefits their team, but keep it short. Perhaps just one bullet point on just one of a few slides. You can then offer to provide more details later in a follow-up meeting or through additional material. So you're upfront, keeping it short, the attention for the high I because that's the dominant profile, and then make sure that you're still taking care of the concerns of the team because even though the big picture is getting covered, they still have that concern for the team that you can address.
In contrast, if you had someone who was showing more high S in the meeting, but also had some high I traits, and you knew that, you want to provide an opportunity for them to share their thoughts, which is the high I, but after they've had time to reflect, which is a high S thing. A high I always has an idea and they want to tell you about it, but the high S needs to think about it first. So you might want to schedule a subsequent meeting or create a space for their input later, allowing them to process and contribute in a way that works for their reserved tendencies that they still have, even though sometimes they appear assertive. Communicating with the combination profiles isn't significantly more difficult than communicating with someone with a single profile. You just have to identify which of the profiles is predominant in the situation in which you're in. You observe, you analyze, you tailor your communication, and then the additional task is to ensure you also account for the concerns of the secondary profile and addressing those concerns in your presentation. And as long as you cover both, you should get a yes for whatever it is that you're trying to present. Thanks, Amanda.
Thanks, Wendy.
Thanks, everyone. That's all for this week. Join us next week as we cover a new topic. Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.